I'm Myra. I'm with the Office of Climate Change here at DEC. This is our Climate Smart Community Grants webinar. Craig is here from our communications office. So if you're having any issues with the technology, you could send him a private chat and he can help you out. And if anything goes wrong with our webinar or our system, he'll get us back up and running. So thank you, Craig, much appreciated. Also on this meeting is Jennifer Finlongo from the grants unit. If you are from the Western New York area or the Long Island area, you might know Jen. She covers your region in terms of grants. Okay, so if you want, you can put your municipality or your region of the state in the chat so we get an idea of where folks are from. We are going to record this webinar and it will be posted to our website. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat. Jennifer is going to be monitoring the chat for questions, and I'm going to attempt to answer them in real time. There's a whole lot of different project types and requirements and caveats in the Climate Smart program. If you're familiar with it, you probably already know that. So we're going to take questions as we go, and hopefully that will keep things a little more kind of on topic. All right. So next thing is I'm going to share my screen, and theoretically you should see my PowerPoint. Okay. Can everybody see my PowerPoint?
Yes, it looks good from our end.
Perfect. Okay. Great. So let's get started. Climate Smart Communities grants. I can't see my slides. Hold on. There we go. For anyone who's not familiar with the Climate Smart Community Grant Program, I'm just going to go over the basics real quick. The program was created in 2016 to help municipalities implement greenhouse gas mitigation and climate change adaptation projects, as well as to support the planning, inventory, and assessment projects that need to happen first in order for communities to be able to do implementation projects through the Climate Smart Community Certification Program. Eligible applicants are municipalities. For this program, they are defined as county, city, town, and village of the state of New York. Other entities, such as quasi-municipalities or nonprofits, or even two municipalities, can participate as part of a project as long as the lead applicant is eligible, and there does need to be a formal partnership agreement between the parties. Applicants do not need to be registered or certified as a Climate Smart community to apply. So you don't have to be part of the certification program to apply for the grants. This year we have a total of $22 million available, both through EPF and the Environmental Bond Act. 21 million is for implementation projects and 1 million is for certification projects. Implementation projects include the climate change adaptation, the greenhouse gas mitigation, and new for this year, the engineering and feasibility studies. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. We do have a match requirement. It's either 50% or 20%, and it's based on total project costs. Federal and state funds cannot be used as match, and we do still accept land value as match for implementation projects. The parcels must be in municipal ownership at the time of application and have an appraisal. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. All right, the match requirement is unfortunately a little bit complicated. So for an implementation project, if all your project components are located in and all your project activities take place in a disadvantaged community census tract, there is a 20% match. There is also inside the RFA is an attachment that shows you how to find the disadvantaged community census tract using the DEC info locator. So if you need any help with that, just download the RFA and follow the instructions inside that attachment. If the municipal applicant appears on the Office of the State Comptroller's environmental stress score list with a designation of either significant environmental stress, moderate environmental stress, or susceptible environmental stress, the match is 20%, regardless of whether the project is inside or outside a disadvantaged community census tract. Also, if a municipal applicant has a median household income that is less than or equal to 67,662 per the census table B19013, the match is also 20%, regardless of whether or not that project is taking place in a disadvantaged community census tract. Now, in the RFA is also an attachment that shows you the step-by-step of how to go through the census site to find that table and your MHI. If none of these things apply, then the match percent is 50%. For certification projects, which is your planning and assessment projects, if the municipal applicant appears on that OSC environmental stress score list under significant stress, moderate stress, or susceptible stress, the match is 20%. Or if that municipal applicant has a median household income less than or equal to the 67,662, the match is also 20%. If none of those things apply, the match is 50%. I saw a bunch of folks get this incorrect in the last round. So I just want to be clear for certification that it's either you have to be on the stress score list or you have to have an MHI that's at 80% or below the median. Otherwise, the match is 50%. The RFA also contains another attachment that has the list of significant, moderate, and susceptible stress. So just check that list to see if you're on the list.
Myra,
Yes.
will the slides from today's presentation be shared afterwards for reference is one of the questions we're getting.
Yes, we are going to record the webinar and we're going to post it onto our website. So if you haven't been to the Climate Smart Community Grants webpage yet, if you just go into Google and type in New York State DEC Climate Smart Communities Grants, it'll be right there. It'll take you, the first thing that comes up in Google will be our website. Okay, land value as match, I also wanted to mention because I see folks get this, make an error here too every now and then. We accept land value as match for an implementation project. The land has to be directly related to the project, like the project, if you didn't have the land, the project couldn't happen. So it's land value as match because it's the value of the land that's the match. It doesn't matter how much you paid for it, and it doesn't matter what source of funds paid for it. What matters is its value. So the municipality may have purchased property in, I don't know, 1970 for $100,000, and they now need to use that for, let's say, I don't know, flood control project. So a current appraisal might say that that land is worth $200,000 now. So your match would be up to $200,000, not the $100,000 you paid for it. And it works the other way around. If you paid, $200,000 for land and now it's only worth 100, then you have match up to 100,000 that you can use in land value. This is why you have to have an appraisal report if you're going to use land value as match or propose to use land value as match in your application. You do have to have a current appraisal report with a valuation date that is within 1 year of the application date. And there's a number of requirements that the state has for appraisals, And again, if you go to our website, there's a little link on the left-hand side um, that says Land Acquisition Toolkit. If you click on that, it'll bring you down to all the information about appraisals. Also with the application, we need the appraisal, a map identifying the property, which includes a section, block, and lot number and adjacent roadways. And then also a copy of the deed. Now, as part of your contract, we're going to require that you put a notice of grant language onto that deed. It does not have to be there at the time of submission. You can put it on after if you get the grant and end up using the property for your adaptation or mitigation project. And there's also a link to that on our website as well.
Okay, we got some questions, Myra.
Okay.
Where can we find the stress level test?
The stress level is in the request for applications. It is attachment E.
Okay.
So,
We have some income limit questions too.
okay.
Is medium income limit of 67,662 for all years 2019 through 2023?
It is, you're looking at 2019 to 2023. That was the most updated information that was available when we wrote the RFA. So that's what we're going to go with.
Okay, and if the project is across municipalities, is the average income defined by the lead municipality or an average of all the municipalities involved?
It's the lead municipality. And one other thing I'll mention is that when you're using the census website to find your median household income, there is a drop down box because they will give you 5 or 6 different years. So you just want to make sure you choose the correct year. You want to choose 2019 to 2023.
Okay, and that's all we have right now for questions, it looks like.
Great, thank you. Okay. Okay, match. I wanted to get into calculating match a little bit because I saw this happen a few times in the last round, and I really hate making an applicant ineligible because they got their match wrong. So if you have a 50% match, it's simple. It's just 50-50. If you have $1 million project, you're asking for $500,000 in grant and $500,000 for match. Same if you have a $4 million project, $2 million and $2 million. The 20% match gets a little bit more complicated. So if you have a $1 million total project cost, you want to ask for $800,000 in grant and $200,000 in match. If you have a $2.5 million project, you want to ask for $2 million in grant and $500,000 in match. So if you're asking for $2 million, which is the maximum for our implementation, you need to show a $500,000 match. And where it gets really tricky is where you have total project costs that exceed what we cover. So for instance, that same $4 million project with a 20% match, you max out a $2 million grant and you have a $500,000 match, but there's still, $1.5 million remaining. So you have to somehow tell us where you think that 1.5 million is coming from. And that's part of the reason, even in a 50-50 match, often you'll have projects that are bigger than just our grant. You're putting together more than one grant because you've got, I don't know, maybe a $14 million project, a $23 million project. They get big, right? So one of the tools you can utilize is inside the application, you have the CFA budget, and then you have the Climate Smart Communities grant template for the budget. The budget template for Climate Smart Communities grant, you want to just focus on what you want the Climate Smart Communities grant to pay for. Okay, so you have this project in mind, it's going to cost this much money, it has these phases or these components. So in that budget, you want to be clear about, we want component A paid for by Climate Smart. Component B is going to be paid for by Climate Smart. Component C is going to be the match. Then in your overall CFA budget, you're going to talk about the entire project and where the balance of the funds is coming from. Because maybe you're applying to Division of Water for a balance of funds. It's good for us to know that. Maybe you're applying to ESD for a balance of funds. And maybe you're not applying to any other grant for balance of funds because you haven't figured it out yet. So you can just put the funds in there so we have an idea of how much more money you need, and you could select the box that basically says that you're still waiting that it's pending, that you're not quite sure where it's coming from yet. Okay, and I hope that makes sense. If you have questions about match, specific numbers, etc., you can always email us at cscgrants@dec.ny.gov, and that email is in this slide deck as well. It's also on our website. It's also in the RFA. Or you can give us a call, and I'll walk you through it. Okay? Okay. Eligible and ineligible expenses. So eligible expenses for climate smart grants, both the adaptation and implementation and certification, are personnel costs. I will flag that these do require time logs. I don't like getting to the end of the project and having someone say, we didn't know we needed time logs. You do need time logs for personnel services. Also for volunteer time, if you're using any type of volunteer time or donated professional services, it's basically treated like personnel services, and that you have to document the time spent working on the project and what tasks were being worked on. Contractual services, equipment purchases or rental that are directly related to the project. Municipal equipment can be used as in-kind. You do need to use either the most recent FEMA rates or DOT rates and be specific about which rates you're using when you propose your budget. Supplies and materials that you need to do the project. Land acquisition was added 2 years ago, I believe, as an eligible expense. So this land acquisition must be in fee only. The municipality must own the land outright. It can't be an easement. It also must be critical to implementing the mitigation or adaptation project. Now, again, land acquisition gets a little bit complicated because there's a lot of requirements that the comptroller has. So again, if you go to our website and look at the land acquisition toolkit, there's a whole lot of information there on what you need, links to documents, etc. And also new for this year is alternative energy equipment such as solar panels and heat pumps that will be eligible expenses. There are some caveats to that too as well, that I will get into a bit later. Ineligible expenses still include salt storage sheds and generators, unless they're part of a bigger adaptation project such as a cooling center and they are powered by means other than fossil fuels. And I know this gets a lot of you, but that is still where we are today. The technology is improving. It's not quite there yet, but you know, it's going to continue to improve. Indirect or overhead costs of the municipality is also not eligible. Salaries and expenses of elected officials. I've seen this come up a few times. That has never been eligible and will not be eligible. So please don't put your elected officials in your budgets. Any kind of fundraising expenses, taxes, insurance, fines, deficit funding, bond interest, and associated bond fees are also not eligible. Technically, contingency costs aren't eligible either. However, we all know that every construction project has a contingency budget. I just encourage you to wrap that into your expenses that you place inside your budget for contractual. However, you will want to break apart engineering expenses and actual construction expenses in your budget.
Okay, Myra, looks like we got some questions on eligible expenses. First one up is just to clarify, as eligible expenses, can volunteer and personnel time be used to help offset calculate match?
It can be your match. I'm not sure what you mean by offset slash calculate. So if you need, you know, $50,000 in match and you can get 20,000 of that through personnel services, that's completely fine. Um, what you want to be careful of if you get into volunteer time is that if the volunteer is working on something that is not, um, related to their expertise, you can only charge minimum wage for that part of the state during that year. So, for instance, if you had a lawyer who was a volunteer and they were reviewing your zoning ordinance, you could use that person's professional staff's fee salary. But if that same lawyer was just attending, a few meetings and reading over some documents that didn't have anything to do with anything legal, or, setting up a room, that would they would have to use minimum wage.
Can volunteer time, such as time committed by a municipality, CSC task force, or project advisory committee of individuals not employed by the municipality be eligible volunteer time or donated professional services for match?
That's likely volunteer time, unless, donated professional services is typically something like, what I see a lot is if your municipality has, like a development agency, like an industrial development agency, and those folks they're technically not the municipality, so they donate their professional services to the municipality. Um, so it would most likely be volunteer time.
Okay. Um, are costs for community engagement, like engagement events and community stipends, eligible?
If you have to rent a space for a community engagement, yes. If you're using municipal space, no, because that's technically overhead. What was the other part of that question?
Just are the costs for community engagement eligible?
So it depends. Basically, it depends. Yeah, if you're like renting rooms or you're hiring a contractor to do your outreach, then yes.
Okay. And yes, this session is going to be recorded and made available online. That was another question we got. Um, does geothermal fall under alternative energy equipment and is it eligible?
Yes, it
Uh,
is eligible.
Get New York got the $100,000 NYSERDA contract grant. We are using some of the grant money for heat pumps in the town hall. Could this count as a match? We have not yet installed the heat pumps and have over a year to do so.
It came from NYSERDA. Your money came from NYSERDA.
Yeah.
No, you can't use that as match because that's state funds.
Um, does installation count for CEC grant eligibility? It's a great start with energy savings, but I haven't seen many grants that can actually pay for it.
I don't know about the Clean Energy Communities program because I don't really work in it. Um, it doesn't seem like just insulation would be enough because you're not really getting at emissions too much because you're still using, assuming you're still using, a fossil fuel boiler or something. Um, I mean, it might reduce your energy use a little bit, but what we're really after at Climate Smart is sort of the changeover from fossil fuel to other forms of energy.
Okay, and then we have two more. Are incentives covered? An example is giving candy for public participation incentive.
No,
And are battery energy storage systems considered alternative energy equipment?
yes,
All right, anyone else before we move on?
So I'll just also mention that when it comes to like public meetings and whatnot, the state will pretty much never allow for paying for any kind of food or sort of enticement to get people there, unfortunately. Um, I've run across that one a number of times. Okay. All right, so let's get into our implementation project types: adaptation, mitigation, and feasibility studies. Okay, mitigation. Maximum grant amount for a mitigation, minimum grant amount for a mitigation project is 50,000, maximum is 2 million. We do have a cap of engineering and design of 15%. This is why you want to break out your engineering from your construction in your budget, because we need to make sure that you're within that 15%. Mitigation, our statute requires us to focus on greenhouse gas mitigation outside the power sector. So this would be things like reducing vehicle miles traveled, reducing organic waste, management of refrigerants. Then we got this renewable energy projects in municipally owned public low income housing added a few years ago. Given our definition of municipality, this is pretty difficult. There aren't a lot of municipalities that own public low income housing. It's usually a housing authority. And this year we've decided to sort of change our definition of outside the power sector a little bit, because we do have a lot of interest in these renewable energy projects in municipal facilities. The caveat here, though, is they can't return energy to the grid for sale. So VMT, this is things like walking and biking trails, bike lanes, sidewalks, any kind of non-motorized transportation, any kind of transportation improvements, public transportation, bike or car share, anything that helps reduce distance commuted, like transportation demand management or carpooling. When it comes to like a walking or biking trail, it doesn't have to be a paved trail. You know, the main point is to give people options to get out of their car and get to where they need to go in some other way other than their single occupancy vehicle. So the idea is you want to connect a neighborhood to a commercial center, a neighborhood to a job center to a commercial center, a commercial center back to the neighborhood. So the point is to try to get folks to get to everywhere they need to go, you know, from home to work, from work to the pharmacy, from the pharmacy back home, without having to be in a car, ideally. Some places it's more possible than others, but that's kind of the goal. So it does not necessarily have to be a paved trail. You know, it could be a stone dust trail or, you know, some other trail that better fits your municipality. Maybe you're more rural and you want to keep your rural feel and you don't want a paved trail. Reducing organic waste. This is also a project area where you can do a number of different projects. The idea is to prevent food waste and reduce its volume in landfills, because once food waste gets in landfills, it creates methane, and then methane is a more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2. So you could do a project like a regional food and or yard waste composting facility, a food donation program, food waste pickup or drop-off sites. Those are actually quite popular and seem to work quite well. There's also the option of doing anaerobic digestion at a wastewater treatment plant. And as where those organics projects were somewhat simple, now we're getting into the refrigerant projects, which are a little more complicated. Again, there's a whole lot of different projects that you can do within this category. You can replace or retrofit an existing refrigeration or HVAC system with a system that uses natural refrigerants. Natural refrigerants are things such as ammonia, carbon dioxide, propane, water, or air. You can establish a municipal disposal program or a community disposal program or both so that refrigerants are collected properly and recycled and aren't released into the environment. So this would be things like refrigerators and air conditioners that are have passed their useful life. There's also the option of adopting codes that will help enable the use of alternative refrigerants in your community. There's also, the option to adopt a new regulation or an incentive or a program to ensure that folks are properly monitoring for leaks, repairing equipment, and disposing of refrigerants properly. The one caveat we have here is that your variable refrigerant flow or your variable refrigerant volume systems are not eligible. Those tend to have a lot of joints and leak a lot at the joints. So they turn out not to be so great for the climate. And they're actually that's where you get into a lot of your heat pump systems. The other thing I'll mention that is that New York has adopted amendments to what's called Part 494, which is the Hydrofluorocarbon Standards and Reporting Act. So this is basically phasing down climate disrupting refrigerants. And we're just trying to get the word out to make sure everybody's aware that this has already started. So the purpose is to meet our required emission limits under the Climate Act. This link here will give you will take you to the actual Part 494 to read so you can see what's in there, what's being phased out when. If you're doing any kind of building project or HVAC project, it's important to know this is coming. It's important to let your engineers that you're working with know that this is coming, because you want to make sure that when you're planning for your building that you're putting in something that's going to be legal at the time it's installed. There's also a potential reporting requirement for your municipality if you have equipment that contains more than 50 pounds of refrigerant. So if you have a ice rink, it's likely you're going to be reporting, but you could possibly need to report if you have like a large county building with a big HVAC system, or say a very large DPW facility with a large HVAC system. You might be needing to report on that. And this link here will also take you to details on that. And also, if you have any questions, you could email us. I'm not the expert on all things refrigeration, but I can put you in touch with the side of the office that will know the answer to your question.
Can I hop in for a second
Yes.
here? Okay, we just have a few. Um, are pilot programs considered design and limited to the 15% under mitigation, like a municipal freon collection program, year one pilot, year two full implementation?
A pilot project is an implementation. It does not need to be under engineering because you're basically doing a mini project and then you'll expand it with changes depending on what you learn in your pilot. So that's just a full-on implementation project.
Okay. Have you worked with counties on implementing bike trails?
We've done a number of bike trails. I can't recall off the top of my head if I don't think they were counties. I think they've mostly been towns where they're usually putting in a bike lane along a sidewalk, along with a sidewalk sometimes. Um, there is one town that added a connection on a larger regional trail as part of their Climate Smart grant. That's the thing I should mention about the reduction in VMT projects when you're getting into walking and biking is what we look for is the building up of a system, right? So we'll ask you for a map that asks for what you have currently in terms of, let's say, bike lanes, what's planned in terms of bike lanes, and what your project is and where it is. Because what we're looking for is we're looking for the buildup of a system, essentially. Because if you have a whole system of bike lanes, people are more likely to use it, or bike trails, or bike paths or sidewalks. People are more likely to use it because they can get from A to B completely using that form of transportation. Um, so when we ask you for that map in the application, please include it.
Could a DEC grant be utilized for curbside pickup program?
For food scraps, yes. We have a number of those projects.
And oh, sorry, Myra.
Sorry, I will just say that the pickup programs so far have not been as successful as drop-off programs. So the expense of mainly the staff time and the driving around to do the pickup. Maybe if it's a municipal project, it might work better. The city of Kingston has a grant to do that, but they haven't started yet, so I don't have any information on how well it's working. Oh,
Kind of back to the bike trails, but sidewalk question. Can the grant be used for deteriorated sidewalk replacement, or can it only be used for new sidewalks?
it can be used for both, but the new sidewalks might score better. It really kind of depends. That's something where it depends how many applications we get and what kind of quality is, whether or not it would make the cut. Um, yeah.
Okay, two more. Are community EV micro mobility charging hubs eligible?
You mean charging stations? EV charging stations?
I think that might be what they mean.
EV charging stations, you have to apply through our ZEV infrastructure grant program. That's something that's excluded from Climate Smart.
And then could a DEC grant be used to help support a nonprofit food scrap composting project pilot that was financed with municipal funds through participatory budgeting?
Possibly. Um,
That has layers.
Depends. Yeah, it does. It does have layers. It kind of depends exactly what is going on and how things are set up. One of our statutory requirements requires that anything we pay for that is, infrastructure or project components has to remain property of the municipality. So if you're like building some kind of building or facility, that would have to remain property of the municipality. And if the municipality is putting that on land owned by the nonprofit, then you're getting into climate change mitigation easements. So it's technically possible, but it does get a little bit complicated. So you'd have to, you might want to call or write about that, write us about that, and we can talk about it a little bit more. Is that all the questions?
Um, to build on the question that was just asked, this would mostly be to help with communication, just for clarification. But that was to do with the composted project.
For the composting project. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think you should give us a call and we'll talk about the details. Okay.
Okay.
No way. Okay, renewable energy projects. This is exciting that we have renewable energy project category. We've seen a lot of interest in putting, solar panels on DPWs, windmills on fire department headquarters, geothermal and county buildings. So hopefully we will be able to support that a little bit. The kind of barrier we're running into is a requirement that we can't return energy to the grid for sale. So, the project would have to do something with the excess energy, because anytime you put renewable energy in, you often have excess energy. So you could use that excess energy to either store it on site. You could potentially use it to charge EV charging stations. Again, we couldn't pay for the EV charging stations through this program, but that wouldn't prevent you from actually implementing that. And this photo from the village of Mount Kisco, that's exactly what they're doing. They have these solar panels on their court building, and the solar panels feed the batteries for their DC fast chargers. And it's really kind of a neat project. So hopefully folks will do some thinking outside the box and come up with some great ideas in terms of this category. If you are going to use a heat pump, just be aware that you have to meet the requirements of Part 494 and make sure that you're not installing a variable refrigerant flow or volume system.
Okay, some renewable energy questions. Um, the CFA text suggests it can only be on public low-income housing, but this slide indicates it could be any municipal facility. Which is it?
So when it comes to completing the application, if you want to do a renewable energy project, you're just going to select the mitigation category. And you're going to fill out the mitigation questions.
Regarding the renewable energy item, if a community is moving a building out of the floodplain as an adaptation project, for example, and wants to rebuild it using geothermal or solar that are connected to the grid, as most municipalities are, does that make the project ineligible? Or does that mean that those portions of the project cannot be covered by grant funds and could only be on the match side? Or is the stipulation to not return the energy to the grid specific to renewable energy only CSC projects?
So if your project's going to return energy to the grid, then the energy portion of it wouldn't be eligible. But you could still move the building out of the floodplain. So we could still pay for the moving the building out of the floodplain. Essentially building the entire building minus the energy piece. If you could find a way to either store it or power something else, then the energy piece would become eligible.
We keep getting um, can solar projects be on municipally owned field or parking lot? Are municipal facilities other than low-income public housing eligible for renewable energy funding?
Yes, through this new project type, you can put solar panels on your DPW or on top of your courthouse. Um, we prefer that they not take up open space. Um, but again, that's going to depend on what kind of land that you have, right? Because you don't want to cut down a bunch of trees to put up solar panels because we need the trees as much as we need the solar panels. And you don't want to take a field that is, home to a lot of bird species that are already stressed and put a bunch of solar panels in there and then not have any place for the birds, right? So it's going to depend a lot on the details. And that's probably something we'll have to look at as we review the project. It is preferred that you put them on some type of building, but in some cases that's not going to be possible, right? So we'll have to weigh all those things when we look at your application.
Can DEC funds be used as down payments for energy performance contracts?
Um, I don't know. I'm not completely sure what an energy performance contract is. So you should send me an email with that question and I will dig into it and find out.
And then we just have two more. If you get credits from NYSEG for excess generation, which you apply to another building meter, is that okay?
That's a legal question. Um, I'm going to have to ask our legal folks about that. So again, send me an email so I can get that. I don't forget to get that looked at.
Yes, there's some other interest in the energy savings performance contract. So yes, feel free to email us those questions. I'll put a link to the email. And then could this grant be used to replace around Oh, can it be used to replace lights that have been discontinued due to mercury content? There's more to it, but it this neighborhood apparently wasn't in our previous LED streetlight conversion project and will be a costly upgrade.
My initial sense is that's more of a NYSERDA type project, but again, send me the details and I'll look into it a little deeper.
Um, there's also, I know we're getting a lot of questions on this. There's no new project type mentioned in the RFA to indicate renewable energy products are eligible generally on municipal buildings. Is this something that falls under the not limited to caveat eligible projects include but are not limited to?
Yeah, I mean, it would be essentially what we did is under mitigation, we used to exclude renewable energy as an eligible expense. So now it's an eligible expense. So it isn't that it's so much of a new category, it's just a newly eligible expense. So again, you would apply for a mitigation project and say, we have greenhouse gas emissions from our building because we're using oil. We want to switch to this. Our current, emissions are estimated to be this. We want to switch to this. So our new, we're reducing emissions by this much. The application basically asks what your project is, what emissions you're targeting, and how you're going to reduce them. So you're still going to be using that project type, but we're just allowing you to now use or have the renewable energy pieces be eligible. And I'll dig into that a little bit more in case I'm not answering your question fully, but I want to get moving to the rest of the presentation. Okay. All right, adaptation projects. Again, the minimum grant amount is 50,000, the max is 2 million. Our engineering and design maximum is 15%. So the adaptation projects are where you're getting into natural resilience, flood risk, flow barriers, and preparation for extreme events. So increasing or preserving natural resilience can be a lot of things. It could be a living shoreline. It could be a floodplain bench. It could be a floodplain restoration, a stream bank stabilization, creation or restoration of a wetland. You might have to, if you're on Long Island, you might have to create a dune or restore a beach. The idea is that the natural feature is going to help reduce risk or vulnerability to some kind of asset and or contribute to flood control or alleviation or mitigating sea level rise. Reducing flood risk. This category also has a lot of different type of projects. One could retrofit or flood-proof a critical facility that can't be moved out of a floodplain, such as a water treatment plant. It can replace, right size, or remove flow barriers, such as bridges and culverts, but could be other flow barriers that you might see out there in your project site. It could be the location of a critical municipal facility that is currently in a floodplain, moving it to higher ground. It must reduce some kind of future climate change risk to an asset, facilitate emergency response, or facilitate the protection of a population center or some asset. Extreme heat preparation could be things like cooling centers are pretty common and popular. Could be a permanent shade structures in your parks or in your cities. It could be a comprehensive tree planting program that includes maintenance and monitoring. Extreme event preparation could be things like emergency warning systems or an emergency preparedness program or response program to whatever it is that is an issue in your community. It might be flooding, it might be extreme heat, it could be 7 feet of snow, whatever it is in your location. So again, we have some caveats with the refrigerants here. So typically, if you're going to replace HVAC equipment, you need to do it with the natural refrigerants. The only time that there is an exception is if you are doing an adaptation project, such as a cooling center or a facility relocation. In those instances, we will allow you to replace the HVAC equipment with, typical refrigerants. However, there's four criteria that need to be met. Well, actually 5. The equipment must be the lowest GWP, which is global warming potential, that's available. There must be a refrigerant management plan for that equipment. There must be an end-of-life disposal plan for that equipment. There must be an end-of-life disposal plan for the refrigerants. There must be leak monitoring, leak detection, and leak repair plans. Any kind of unsealed refrigerant equipment must have a leak detection system. Again, there's the Part 494 requirements, which anything you install must meet those requirements at the time that the installation is going to occur. And again, if you are doing heat pumps, the variable refrigerant flow volume systems aren't eligible for these projects either. Notes on flood projects, such as culverts, bridges, and stormwater systems. These projects must be designed for future flows, whether it's sea level rise, flood volume, or precipitation. At minimum, we want you to use the guidelines that are in the flood risk management guidance. So in certain cases, certain parts of the state, you're adding 10% flow on top of your current, and other parts you're adding 20% type of flow, 20% flow on top of your current. And then it's a whole different story when you get into sea level rise. There's also the TEC has the guidance for bridge and culvert projects in non-tidal waters, requiring a protection of waters permit and a water quality certificate. That's a mouthful. That's also linked here, but that's where a lot of these requirements come from. So if your bridge or your culvert is in a waterway and it's got an opening of over 20 feet, it's got to be designed to pass the 100-year flood plus the climate change multiplier. On top of that, your bridges have to have 2 feet of freeboard when passing flows from a 50-year storm with a climate change multiplier on top. Culverts, box culverts, and bridges that are smaller than 20 feet have to pass the 50-year flood plus the climate change multiplier for your area. In addition, those culverts, box culverts, bridges that are under 20 feet must have at least 2 feet of roadway freeboard above the 50-year flood elevation and be able to pass the 100-year flow and climate change multiplier without overtopping the road. You can find more about those requirements in the document that is linked here. When it comes to stormwater systems, these can be a little more complicated. A lot of the stormwater projects we see are in areas that are already completely developed and they only have so much room to move so much stormwater. So depending on where you are, excuse me, the stormwater conveyance system can be designed to carry the greatest possible flow that your project site can handle, including the climate change multiplier. So if you think you can size up to a 25-year storm, it's got to be the 25-year storm plus the climate change multiplier. You also want to look at intercepting, attenuating, and infiltrating stormwater before it flows into your system. So if any space at all for any type of swales, rain gardens, all those other smaller pieces, please consider those as well. Because sometimes if you put in a whole lot of small little things, it can actually make a big difference if it's done across a wide area and you don't necessarily need to dump all the water into a stormwater system that's just dumping more water further downstream. So something to be cognizant of is what happens downstream if we put all this water in these pipes, because you don't really want to cause a problem for somebody else. And sometimes it's actually upstream where you can find your best benefits. So we'll want you to take, basically a watershed look at it, use the stormwater design manual, and design your stormwater projects the best to the best possible scenario. And in some cases, you're going to have to accept, if you're willing to accept certain levels of flooding, like say you can design it to the 25-year storm plus climate change projections, but you have to realize that you're going to flood at a 50 or 100. Okay.
Okay, so we have some questions building up.
Okay.
Let's see. Remove and replace bridges or just remove is a question.
It can be either. Sometimes you need to remove it because it shouldn't be there to begin with. Other times it needs to be widened or elevated. So either of those would be eligible.
Okay. Does a permanent shade structure have to have all elements up all year? For example, could mounts slash a stand element be up all year, but there be a sail component that is taken down during snow season?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Would a project that reduces inflow and infiltration into a wastewater treatment system be eligible?
Mm, my initial sense is I don't think so, but I might have to think about that one a little bit more.
Okay, and always you guys can send those questions directly to the
Oh,
grants inbox. Agricultural resiliency, is it eligible? Uh, we'd probably need more details.
yeah. I don't see most municipalities having agricultural facilities, um, but maybe they do,
Oh,
or maybe they need
resiliency.
to work
Mhm,
with a
mhm.
farmer or a farm to achieve it. Yeah, again, we would need details on that one. So send an email or phone call.
And then is installation of a new HVAC in a facility that doesn't have one eligible? Oop. Or is it only eligible to replace an existing HVAC?
Your building currently has no HVAC. You could put one in as long as it's natural refrigerants.
Would repair and improvement of a damaged sewer system in a severe flood area qualify?
Likely, yes.
Yeah. Would something like a splash pad be eligible for extreme heat preparation?
Yeah, that would be eligible. It's kind of it's almost like a cooling center, but a little more fun.
Does it cover creating levee berm?
Potentially,
Okay. And then could you repeat the answer on the shade structures?
yes. You could have, you could pull down the part of the shade structure for snow season. Um, that makes a lot of sense because the snow season could potentially damage it. Um,
Okay.
all right, great. Another new project that we have for this year is feasibility studies. There are only two that are eligible, either flood mitigation or doing studies to replace HVAC systems with or refrigerant systems with natural refrigerants. So for flood mitigation, again, there's a whole lot. This list here is not all of the requirements for flood mitigation. You'll want to see the RFA for all the requirements. We're basically aligning with Resilient New York, the Resilient New York study, so that studies done through both programs can also be eligible for grants through both programs. So again, we're going to want you to include that projected increases in flood or precipitation or storm surge or sea level rise from climate change. You're going to have to do your HEC-RAS modeling. We want you to take that comprehensive watershed-wide approach. Prioritize nature-based flood mitigation where it's possible. Also look at a number of alternatives, including a no action alternative. Sometimes taking no action is the least expensive, but it also does have costs and consequences. So we want to be sure those are evaluated as well. And then, the outcome for a conceptual design for the preferred alternative would be great in those studies. For replacing the HVAC systems with natural refrigerants, again, this is basically everything we've talked about. It's got to use a natural refrigerant. It's got to comply with 494. It should also have a no action alternative. Cost estimates, emission reductions estimates, and then also a discussion of maintenance, ongoing maintenance. It's something we tend to forget about, but it's all important for these newer systems because they're different and folks need to learn how to manage and maintain them. Okay, so now we're out of implementation projects and into certification projects. So these are your planning and assessments. The minimum grant amount is 10,000, the maximum is 200. Again,
Myra,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry. Just before we move on to certification, we have just one question about the feasibility studies.
Okay.
Um, for feasibility studies that replace HVAC systems with natural refrigerants, does that allow for studies to replace fossil fuel systems with heat pumps using natural refrigerants, or is it meant for only replacing existing refrigerant systems with natural refrigerants?
Can you repeat that?
So for the feasibility studies to replace the HVAC systems with natural refrigerants, does this allow for studies to replace fossil fuel systems like natural gas, fuel, oil, etc., with heat pumps
Yes.
using natural refrigerants? Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So with heat pumps, though, you got to be careful to comply with 494 and the no variable refrigerant flow systems. But yeah, regardless of whether you're doing a retrofit or you're building a new building, either way, you could do this study for the natural refrigerants.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Okay. So getting back to certification projects, the same 20 certification actions that were eligible for grants last year are eligible for grants this year. And I'm going to stress again that there's minimum requirements for the actions. Please look at the minimum requirements for the actions before submitting your application. Please include them in your work plan and your budget. You have to meet those requirements in order to be eligible for the grant. So I want folks to know up front what they're getting themselves into before they release their RFPs, before they start their documents, and definitely before they send us a draft. Because we have had folks not understand that there are certain requirements they have to meet, and then they have to go back and sort of amend their studies to meet the objectives of the actions. So there is a subheading under each action called how to obtain points and what to submit, and those two subheadings will give you details on what that action is looking for. This is a link to the Climate Smart Community Certification Portal. This is where you can find all of the actions. You can also register to be a Climate Smart community if you're not registered yet. You can find documentation from other communities of what they've submitted. And if you start an application for certification, you'll do it in this portal. And these are the actions that are eligible for grants. So these are all hot links. They should take you right to the action, its description, requirements, etc. As you can see, they are the same ones from last year. There's 20 of them. Okay. Let's look at the time here. All right, so getting into application preparation. So I suggest please download the request for applications and read through the entire thing. Available through the CFA, which is at this link. Please submit early. Applications that come in, at 4 p.m. on July 31st don't always make it in if there's a difference between the clock in the CFA and the clock in your office. So please submit early or than the last day. All right, so in our applications, we're going to ask for a draft work plan and a budget. Your work plan is going to have the goal task performance measure system. So the objective is your goal, the task is your task, what you're actually doing, and then your performance measure is a tangible object that you're going to hand to us at the state that says you completed this task. So please make your performance measures tangible. Do not make them esoteric. It could be a copy of a design document. It could be a photo. It could be a plan. Just make sure it could be a memo describing what you've done so far for this task. But please make sure it's something tangible. And again, for certification projects, please refer to the certification portal and the specific requirements for each action. The budget, we discussed the budget a little bit and the two different budget forms that exist within the CFA. For our template, please make sure that the budget aligns with the work plan. So if your work plan contains engineering, there should be engineering in your budget. If your budget contains engineering, there should be engineering in your work plan. You don't need to show us any overmatch on this budget. It just needs to be your grant plus your match, your total project cost. If your total project cost exceeds the climate smart grant and match, you're going to put that in the budget that's in the CFA document. Okay, and again, please make sure your match is correct. So in preparing your application, we talked about this already a little bit. We touched on this. For mitigation projects, we're looking for you to tell us your current emissions, or at least an estimate of your current emissions. If you have your own greenhouse gas inventory, please use the numbers from that. You know, the 2010 regional inventories are still available, but they are getting out of date. So it is helpful if you have your own greenhouse gas inventory that you can reference. What greenhouse gas emissions are you targeting, and how is your project going to reduce the emissions? So we're looking for, you know, quantifiable evidence that demonstrates a reduction. And we don't have a prescribed way to do any of this. You know, organics is probably the easiest because the EPA WARM model exists, and that's a pretty good model. So you would estimate the amount of food scraps you expect to collect, you run it through the WARM model, and bang, there you go, you get an emissions reductions estimate. Biking and sidewalk projects are a little more difficult, and refrigerant projects are also a little more difficult, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Do your best. Explain to us what method you used and how you came to the conclusion that you've got, and that is typically sufficient. For adaptation projects, we're looking overall for you to have an idea of what your current situation is, how that's anticipated to change under climate change scenarios. You know, so if you're doing a project that's focused on heat, what are your current days above 90 and what are the projected days above 90? And how your project is going to alleviate those threats from the climate change that you're going to see. So discussion of the current, how it's going to get worse, and how your project is going to alleviate the problem is what we're looking for in adaptation projects. And again, your analysis doesn't have to be perfect. Tell us what you did, show us what models you used, what data you used, how you calculated, and how you came to the conclusion you came to. For certification projects, we're looking for why the project is needed in the community. How's it going to meet that local need or solve a problem or provide some critical information that's missing, and how that's going to lead to a specific implementation project. Again, for these, you want to, again, make sure you look at the actions and the requirements and be realistic about how much it's going to cost to do those actions. I mean, we have received applications where folks want to do 9 different actions for $20,000, you know, which in the end isn't very realistic. So just be careful with that if you're doing a budget and a work plan for a certification project. The scoring and evaluation criteria is available in the request for applications, implementation and certification. Very slightly, the criteria that are in bold are the ones that carry the most points. So you will want to look at the questions that answer to these criteria when you're writing your application. Make sure those are thoroughly answered. It's your best chance for increasing your points. And this is just an example of the layout in the RFA. The numbers are different now, but it basically shows you where you get the maximum points and what it is that you need to provide to get those points. The next few slides contain sources of climate change data and information. I'm not going to get into every single one of these. This is basically provided here for you to look through on your own time to get the information that you need. So we have the New York Climate Impacts Assessment, sea level rise projections, the flood risk management guidance, the natural measures down here is good for flood control. There's also the guidance I mentioned for the non-tidal waters requiring a protection of waters permit, et cetera, et cetera. The stormwater design manual, some information from Hudson River shoreline, sustainable shorelines, the greenhouse gas inventories from 2010, some refrigerant information, heat profiles, green purchasing. If you're on the coast, DOS's coastal risk zone mapping and risk assessment tool. There are local laws for resilience models, good to look at if you need to create some type of zoning or legislation. Climate mapping, climate friendly refrigerants. The last I checked, the National Climate Assessment was still up and the climate change indicators were still there. And then again, never hesitate to contact your local universities or environmental organizations or USGS offices for any information they might have that's more detailed to your location. A couple of other points. Again, I want to mention that you do not need to be registered or certified as a climate smart community to apply. We do accept more than one application for different projects. We don't have a limit on the number of grants that can be open concurrently. This program is currently still reimbursement only, so it's important to know that the costs must be paid upfront by you, the grantee, and then it'll get reimbursed by the state once you submit reimbursement request. We do have a 5-year project contract term and request that you complete your project within that 5 years. We do have an MWBE goal that is 30%. It now applies to all awards of 25,000 or more. Many years ago, it only applied to construction projects, but it now applies to everything that's 25,000 or more. There's also a SDVOB goal that is 6%, also applies to all awards. And there's another link to our grants page where we have the land acquisition requirements and the land acquisition toolkit in case you need information on that. Now that we're using the statewide financial system, grants management system, there are some pretty important roles that need to be completed. This doesn't apply until you get awarded a contract, but just to give you the heads up, there was lots of delays when we initially switched over to SFSGM that were caused by municipalities not having these 3 roles completed. There are other roles, but these are the minimum. So you have your grants contract editor. That's the person who's going to be working on the contract documents, such as the budget and work plan. It needs to be a specific person. It can't be a title. Then you have your collab, which is the person who's approving the budget and work plan. Sometimes it's the same as your grants contract editor, and sometimes it's not. Depends. And then the most important is your contract approver. This has to be a municipal official that is legally authorized to enter a contract with New York State. Do not put a contractor in here any contract signed by a contractor is illegal because they're not legally authorized to sign on behalf of the municipality, unless your municipality passes, legislation that allows for that. Most of you don't have that. Occasionally, I've seen it. Again, the signatory, it's typically your municipal CEO, but you could potentially have a municipal CFO instead. Make sure their name and not their title is entered, because the system generates a signature from whatever you put in there, and you can't have a signature that says, director of planning. It's got to be John Doe, right? Okay, so just be aware of that. I talked a little bit about our partnership agreements and climate change mitigation easements. This is a little bit more information. So if you have multiple municipalities or a quasi-municipal authority or a nonprofit, et cetera, working with you, you're going to have to identify who the partners are, what their roles are, what their responsibilities are, and what their financial contribution is. All of that needs to be laid out in a partnership agreement. For the application, we need at minimum a letter of commitment that lays out everything I just mentioned. If you have a draft agreement or even an executed agreement already, include that. We will request that the agreement be executed before we move the contract on to execution. For the climate change mitigation easement, this applies when a project occurs on a property that's not owned by the municipal applicant. It basically ensures that the property is going to provide the public benefit for a minimum of 10 years. For some of those projects, we're going to require that they be longer, depending on the type of project. It will allow for municipal collection of data and doing maintenance. We do have a template available on our website, and that is the link again to our website. The other thing I'll note is that if your project is taking place on a DOT right-of-way, the municipality is not the owner of that DOT right-of-way. So that technically triggers the climate change mitigation easement, but DOT can't sign one. So we have created a modified MUA with DOT. So if you are doing a project on DOT right-of-way, you will be going through that process of signing that MUA, that modified MUA with DOT. So just to be aware of that. And that's basically it. This is our contact information. Again, the link to our website with lots of information, our CSC grants email to email us, any questions you might have, and I'll be expecting a lot of those from you folks. And if I don't get to any questions that I don't get to today, I believe we can pull out of the chat, and I can respond to those as well. The Climate Smart website for the certification program, the Climate Smart email to get in touch with Dazzle and her team for specific questions about certification, and then our phone number. Okay. And that is it. We have about 7 minutes left.
Okay. There was a few questions in the chat. If you wanted to go over them, or did you want to maybe reach out at a different time?
I think we might as well go through them, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Okay. Would a complete streets master plan qualify under a certification project?
It's probably going to be under the planning for biking and walking action.
Okay. This next question is about the cap on awards. Assuming an applicant submitted proposals for a $2 million implementation project and a $200,000 certification project, the maximum award per applicant is $2,200,000, or is there a lower cap on awards to any one applicant?
Oh, that's a good question. There is, but it's very high, so you're likely not to meet it. I believe it's 50% of I'm gonna have to look that one up and get back to you. There is a cap, but I honestly can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But you're likely not to meet it if you're a smaller community. You know, if a really large community like New York City applied for 4 grants, we probably couldn't award all of them because they would max it out. So yes, if you want to apply for a $200,000 grant and a $2 million grant, you're going to be fine.
Okay. Can you explain the CC multiplier or point to that information?
The climate change multiplier is in the flood risk management guidance. For parts of the state, it's 10% on top of your, mostly like the, sort of like the west. Like if New York was a T on its side, it would be the straight line from sort of like kind of Syracuse over to the west is 10% additional flow, and then anything sort of like New York City up to the North Country is 20% on top of your current flows or precipitation.
Okay. This next question's a little specific, so you might have to answer it later on, but Kingston is leading a proposal that includes a flood early warning system improvement from Stevens Institute. As a nonprofit academic institution, we have been providing these forecasts for 20 years. However, we do research as a university, and we aren't supposed to give up ownership of our research data and products. Has there ever been a workaround for such an issue?
Now that's kind of a new one for us. I would need more details on that, just because I need to be more clear exactly what you're asking.
Yeah, that sounds like something that you're gonna want to email.
Mhm.
Um, just so I can get as many as possible. Contractor cannot sign. Does that mean the consultant cannot sign either for the um
Correct. It has to be a municipal official that signs your contract. So town supervisor, village mayor, um, if you have some communities have a municipal chief financial officer and others don't. So if you have one of those, that could qualify. For counties, it can often be, the director of planning and development, or a lot of DPW um, directors have authority to sign contracts. You kind of have to, in a way, you kind of have to look at your municipality and figure out who is the ultimate authority.
Okay. Do munis have to use the climate change mitigation easement template, or can they use a more traditional easement as long as it meets the other requirements for data collection, maintenance, and minimum 10 years?
You can sort of meld the two. All of the information that's required in our template has to be included in any easement, including the attachments.
Okay, and then could you speak a little more about reporting requirements for comprehensive tree planting maintenance under adaptation?
So you would want to tell us how many trees you're planting, when you're planting them, how old they are. Basically make a plan for, I don't know, maybe you have a forester that's been hired by your community, and that forester is going to go out every month for the first year to check on the baby trees, see how they're doing, if they need pruning or if they've got insects or whatever needs to be done, replace the ones that have died. Once the first year is over, they're going to go remove the protective wraps or whatever they put on the tree, and then they're going to go out and check on them every 3 years. They're going to measure their circumference, look for insects and pests and diseases and etc. It's basically like a plan of how you plan to maintain the trees. Somebody's got to look after them, make sure they're not diseased. If they are, cut them down, plant a new one in its place. A lot of times you have those metal things that are around the base and the tree's growing bigger than the metal thing, but nobody's come to take the metal thing out, like stuff like that, to make sure the tree stays healthy, and actually grows to be a canopy tree that can actually provide shade and stormwater mitigation.
Okay, I think we're gonna have to take some of the other ones in through email because they're kind of getting specific. Um,
Okay, we're basically at time,
mhm.
so thanks so much, everybody, for attending. I hope this was helpful. Um, we are doing this again in July, so if you have feedback, I will greatly take it and try to improve the next webinar as much as I can. Okay, appreciate it. Thanks so much, everybody.
Myron, just save the chat just in case you want to have it for future reference, okay?
Okay,
All
yes,
right.
thank you.
All right,
Appreciate
thanks.
it. All right, bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Jen.
Yep.
Did a bang up job.
I tried. They got really specific.
It's
Um,
okay.
but yeah, and there was a few I didn't understand what they were asking as I was reading it. So I was like, I don't know if she's gonna understand, but we'll
Okay,
uh we'll figure
we'll
it
take a
out.
look. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Thank
Bye.
you.